Hey everyone, fascinating discussion today. We're diving into the world of frictionless data security in a cloud and Gen AI driven world with Bedrock Security. Pranab, how are you?
Doing good, Evan. Thanks for having me on the show, and
Well,
great to be
thanks for
here.
being here. I'm really intrigued by the work you're doing and your unique perspective on this industry. Maybe jump in. Let's do some introductions to yourself, a little bit about your biography and your mission at Bedrock Security.
Let's do it. Um, Bedrock is a data security company. Prior to starting Bedrock, I spent about a decade in data protection and data security. That journey started as me being a founding engineer at a company called Rubrik. Back then, we were doing data protection, but data protection naturally evolved into a data security story as ransomware started taking off in 2018.
Mm.
And the idea was if you had your backups, you could be resilient against ransomware. So I started the company's ransomware discovery and response unit, and I continued that journey at AWS as well. At AWS, uh, when the ransomware dialog came up across the Fortune 500, there the volume of data was in petabytes, right? And so the idea of just backing up multiple petabytes of data doesn't quite resonate with the Fortune 500. The costs alone make it infeasible. And so the idea of taking a risk-based approach to what data needs to be protected across a very large environment started taking root there. And so that was the basis for thinking about Bedrock. Started Bedrock in 2022 and have been building it since.
Well, congratulations. It's quite a mission. And talk about your approach. I think it's pretty unique to data visibility and compliance. What's your philosophy there, given this very crowded and complex data security landscape?
I would say that when it comes to data security, one of the hardest problems, I should say, two of the hardest problems are coverage, being able to actually see all of the data. And the second is making sense of it. What is important and what is not? The first coverage has been a problem because at these very large scales, when you get into multi-petabyte environments, traditional approaches of looking at everything do not work. If you
Mm.
tried to look at everything at that scale, you would be scanning for years. And a lot of the traditional technologies, if you try to use them, they will take years to scan. And so the first step is how do you make it lightning quick? In today's environments, people don't have time to wait for years to get those results. So step one, how do you make it lightning quick? We invented a technology called adaptive sampling. And the idea there is at very large scales, you should be able to understand the way you sample makes a big difference in terms of the accuracy that you're looking at. And so that's the first step. How do you go very fast across these large scale environments? The second is how do you make sense of that data? And there in data security and in DLP, traditionally, the way that it's been done is using rules. So having a rule for like a regular expression for, let's say, social security numbers. And the problem with rules is many things look like social security numbers, and you get a lot of false
Mm.
positives, and that's where that bad rep comes from in the data security industry. So at Bedrock, rather than using rules, we use similarity. So the example I like to use is if you hired me to do data security at Tech Influencer, you might say, Pranava, W-2s and W-4s are restricted, right? And I'd say, okay, got it. Now, let's say a 1099 form comes along. I'd never seen a 1099 before, and you didn't teach me whether 1099s are restricted or not. But by reading the contents, I can tell that it's pretty similar to the W-2 and the W-4. And so even if I've never seen it before, I can reason that it's probably restricted and I can block it from being shared, right? And so that's what we call AI reasoning, the ability to
Mm.
use similarity between content to learn things that don't explicitly have labels. And the value to the business is rapid time to value. You're not sitting there playing a game of whack-a-mole trying to get all the rules for every single file in. You label you label a couple of key content. The rest of it is learned. So those are the two differentiating factors for Bedrock: being able to get wide coverage across your multi-petabyte environments, and in that wide coverage, start learning and interpolating what is the classification of that data and making it easy for people so that as team sizes get smaller, you can still keep up with that data.
A fantastic approach. So, enter Gen AI about a year ago. What were some of the unique challenges that Gen AI introduced into the data security landscape? Because this is a hot topic right now.
Yeah, well, it comes in multiple forms. With Gen AI, I'd roughly break it down. If you think about how enterprises are leveraging them, there's copilots, there's RAGs for internal workflows and even external customer workflows. And then there's net new, there's fine tuning, and then there's net new foundational model training as well. And across all of these mediums of consumption, the data it's data that's powering all these mediums, right? Whether it's a copilot all the way down to training in a new foundational model. So there's this idea of what data is going into these models, and the reason that's important is trying to put control on what's coming out is hard
Mm.
with these models. It's been shown time again that these models can be jailbroken. So putting good guardrails on the output is a hard problem. And the best guarantee to ensure that sensitive data doesn't come out is to make sure that it's not going in the first place,
Mm.
right? And so we call that concept a data bill of materials. But if you have a model, if you have a copilot, what data is going in is a very good indicator, is a very good bound for what data might be coming out, right? And so to come back to your question about why Gen AI makes data security hard, it's once the data goes in, the nature of what a model is doing in terms of combining that data for the given prompt at hand, that is very hard to put a boundary around. And so that's in terms of being able to securely embrace these generative AI models. We like to say that a good defense is a good offense, right? Make sure if you don't
Mm.
want something coming out, don't let it go in. Don't train a model on PII in the first place. Yeah.
Great advice. Love the analogy there. You talk a lot about continuous security assessments and the need for this, ongoing risk assessment and mediation. What's your philosophy behind that?
Well, if, actually, let's actually talk about we can actually take that concept and apply it to the generative AI example,
Mm.
right? So let's say, for example, that you have a copilot that you've deployed on, let's say, your enterprise document, whether it's Google Drive, enterprise documents store, whether it's Google Drive or Office 365. In that environment, let's assume that there's nothing sensitive right now. There's a copilot. All the documents are internal documents, but no PII, no nothing sensitive, or no healthcare documents, none of that, right? So when you ask questions of that copilot, it's looking at all the docs you have in Google Drive and Microsoft Office
Mm.
365, and we can guarantee that it's not going to put out sensitive data because there's no sensitive data
Mm.
for it to put out, right? But now let's say someone inadvertently adds a document containing patient data into into one of those drives. They're just doing their work. They put this document there, right? Now, if that copilot is working on top of that environment, all of a sudden that copilot now has access to sensitive patient data. And for the people that have access to that document, even if they didn't know they had, there's a lot of documents you have access to in Google Drive and Office 365, right? You don't know all those documents. And so even if there's sensitive content in them right now, you can hide behind security through obscurity. Or the organization is safe because of that, because you don't know those
Mm.
documents exist. But with copilots, it is very easy for a prompt to leak that data now. And so this
Mm.
idea of continuously monitoring is for all these environments that can potentially expose data, you can't get rid of them all because they're productive to the business. Like you're not going to get rid of the copilot. It's very helpful to the business. So you have to monitor and make sure that the risk that you're taking is understood at any given point in time. And if someone moves that data there, you want to be able to catch it right away and contain the problem. Because right now, that situation of patient healthcare data ending up in Google Drive, the Copilot can now reveal
Mm.
that would have only been caught before Bedrock. It would have only been caught before through a leak or someone
Mm.
accidentally identifying serendipitously identifying that data was there, right? And at very large scales, that's really hard to do. So this idea of being able to continuously monitor what data is being created, where is it going, what are the points of exposure of that data, that gets really important as organizations more autonomously embrace technology. And again, technologies like adaptive sampling let you keep up with that data, and technologies like AI reasoning let you understand which of that data is high impact and will create problems, right? And it needs to be contained.
Fantastic approach. So it really sounds like it's about reducing data risk surfaces any other tactics or best practices that you recommend with clients?
Well, to just double click on that, understanding that data, that surface first requires being able to know what data is there, right? So,
Mm.
for example, if you're an organization that uses AWS and then let's say Snowflake, and there's data spread between the two,
Well,
there might
funny
be a
you had
lot
to
of
pick that as an example, given all the news out there at the moment. Just imagine that. Yes.
just imagine that exactly. I if you think about how enterprises do their data flows, data like customer data is first received in production, right? There's services in there that are dealing with customer data. That's going to be stored in your databases, your NoSQL data stores, etc. There will be data pipelines that will move that into Snowflake. So the gradient goes from infrastructure-like environments to analytics-style environments. Now, as part of that data flow through these pipelines, that data should be scrubbed. But a lot of times, and as a growing trend, most organizations will first dump the data into their data lake environments or their data warehouse environments, and then in the data within those environments, they'll do downstream processing. So that's called ELT, right, versus ETL. And so you have all of this data coming into these environments, and the nature of these of data analytics is it's pretty open. Like people, organizations want people to be able to have access to this data to do productive experiments, to get more insight, to be productive. And so you have lots of potential sensitive data coming in because people typically just pick the data over. And you also have lots of folks without security training that have access to these environments as well. And so it makes for an ideal situation for adversaries, right? Lots of data, lots of access. So now it becomes a question of let's go. As long as one of those folks with high levels of access can be phished, that's the path in, right? And that's why you see some of the efficacies of these attacks.
A really, really interesting insight. Talk about the landscape today for data security. There's so many vendors. A client might have dozens of security vendors. How do you integrate not just with existing systems, but into different security frameworks? And how does that process work with new customers?
Yeah, in terms of how one integrates in today's environments, I would say that being able to rapidly get up and running is one of the most important aspects. So in terms of how one integrates, Bedrock in particular will is API native, doesn't require any agents, doesn't require any proxies. So for a lot of our customers and prospects, getting up and running is a matter of 15 minutes. We give them a CloudFormation template, an infrastructure as code template, whether it's CloudFormation, Terraform, etc. They can deploy it in one of their cloud environments. Bedrock gets set up, and the adaptive sampling starts right away, right? And for us, because of how adaptive sampling works, we've handled multiple petabyte environments in hours, right? So to answer your question about how one gets started and gets up, it gets going, that's how we do it. In terms of where the products need to integrate, you want to make sure that you're covering your infrastructure environments. So whether that's AWS, Azure, GCP, you want to make sure that on the SaaS side as well, enterprises have a lot of sensitive data sitting in Office 365, in G Drive, etc. Making sure that the solution can also integrate there. And then that's the data coverage aspect of it. Then you want to start looking at access and entitlements. So across infrastructure and across SaaS, who has access to what machines have access to what. You want to make sure that you then analyze all of that, normalize all of that into a graph. So that's integrating into the different workloads that an enterprise might have. Then the integration story gets deeper, which is you want to make sure that the results that you're generating, they integrate into wherever you're doing your work right now as a security team. So that whether that's that data getting piped to a SIM, if there's a detection that certain types of data, for example, and let's come back to data warehouses and data lakes. If you have a data warehouse and data lake, and all of a sudden you see a rapid enumeration of all the data that's there. Coming back to your attack framework a bit as well. Like if you think about MITRE, for example, there's the progression across the framework. If you start seeing signals of reconnaissance where someone's rapidly listing out a lot of your different tables or your data sources, then you're starting to see that they're actually going through and doing a mass dump across these tables. Those are all the signs you want to look for, and you want to integrate that with your SIM so that your operators, your SOC operators, can actually catch that. And the sooner you can catch it, the sooner you can actually the sooner you catch it, the sooner you can actually put the brakes on it, right? So those are some of the integration points.
Yeah, great ideas, great tips there. Um, we have a notoriously private industry when it comes to talking about clients and naming them and talking about success stories. But can you talk about your customers, who they are, or maybe industries, and highlight some specific use cases?
Absolutely. So relevant to the times, I'll speak to a couple of customers in financial services and also a couple of customers in HR tech as well. But in both cases, very large Snowflake tenants. One of them had, one example, financial services, had a nearly 2 petabyte Snowflake tenant. And another HR tech company had about 10 petabytes sitting in Snowflake. So these are gargantuan deployments in terms of the data that's sitting in there. And in both situations, actually, and I'll speak to one other company as well, they deal with a lot of observability data that's also coming in to their Snowflake environments as well. And in all these situations, the very first thing that they'd set out to do was understand what type of data was going in the first place. They had all sorts of data pipelines bringing data into these environments. Their question was, we have a rapidly growing presence in Snowflake with a lot of data coming in. We know that there's a lot of access as well. For starters, just what do we even have, right? What's high impact to the business? And I like to think about that visual as a heat map, right? Just across all the tables, the hundreds of thousands of tables that we have over here. Which data is most important to the business? Which is highest impact if an adversary got to it? So building that heat map, that's the first unit of value. The second unit of value, and again, this is consistent across all these domains, whether it's financial services, HR tech, observability. The second unit of value is for that high impact, red hot data that's sitting in Snowflake. Step one, is it supposed to be there, right? And if it's not, how do I decommission that data, right? I need to work with some teams to say, hey, you're not even using this data. It's red hot. This is a risk to the business. I need to decommission it. So every single one of these customer examples, once they found the data, the first exercise they did was use the telemetry from Bedrock to go to the data owner and evaluate, does this data still need to be there? And if not, using Bedrock to decommission that data. For the data that's remaining, the next piece is who all has access to that data? What is for this red hot data? It turns out that Evan and Pranab both have access to it, but only Evan's using it. Pranab is not even using it, right? He was just granted a wide role for the sake of convenience. Those are low-hanging fruits in terms of reducing the likelihood of these types of attacks, right? The more access you can prune away, the harder it is to get to that data, right? And so that's the second exercise that all these examples did, which is prune that access, and then they started monitoring. So when this actually happened, one of the things that all of our customers were able to do was go look at the usage patterns to look for indicators of compromise for this particular threat actor and make sure that they weren't there. After that, they also after making sure those indicators of compromise weren't there, they also went and double verified that the data that was showing up in these environments was authorized to be there, and all the folks that had access were well authorized to have that access. So just an example of how some of these folks across these industries have been using Bedrock.
Fantastic. Well, it's going to be a hot summer, and we're already in the midst of it. What are you excited about personally, professionally? Any deliverables on the product side or meetings, meetups? You've got Black Hat and DEF CON coming up. What's on your radar?
We're going to be at Black Hat in full force, so definitely come check us out in the Expo Hall. We're also going to be doing a good number of exciting announcements, especially centered around Gen AI as well. So I think for us, it is a nonstop summer of action, and and we'll definitely be on the road as well. So hopefully the weather will not be the weather will be somewhat
Oh
accommodating.
yeah, it's only 125 in Las Vegas. What could go wrong? So, but yeah, we'll all be inside, soaking up the AC. Well, thanks so much for joining. Really illuminating and thoughtful discussion. Appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for watching. Go meet Bedrock at Black Hat if you're there. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Take
folks.
care.
Bye.
Bye bye.